Hello everybody, and welcome back to my sunroom on this beautiful, warm, sunny day here in East Tennessee. It's the end of February, and this week the temperatures are much warmer than they were last week when we had that Arctic cold blast. The temperatures today were in the 60s, and you can feel spring coming. Today we're going to talk about bud blast and premature bloom drop. It's a timely subject, especially after all the cold weather that so many of us experienced last week. One of the upsides of growing orchids is the beauty and the awesomeness that they add to our lives. And the downside is sometimes things happen, especially with the weather, that are out of our control. I've grown orchids now for about 20 years, and I can tell you from my experience that some years are better and easier years for growing orchids than others. So this is meant to encourage you, even if you do have some bud blast in your collection, and I'll tell you what you can do to minimize it as much as possible. I'll show you some examples of bud blast in my own collection, so if it's happened to you, you're definitely not alone. Bud blast occurs when there is a shock or a sudden change to the orchid. Rapid temperature and humidity changes can cause a discrepancy between the outside and the inside temperature of the flower bud. It also happens when buds and blooms are exposed to gases or chemicals that cause them to drop prematurely. So a good thing to keep in mind is to try to keep the temperature and the humidity around your orchids as steady and constant as possible. After your orchids start budding or blooming, a 10 to 15 degree temperature change, either cooler or warmer, can cause bud blast. Orchids in the wild go through very gradual temperature changes, so it's wise to mimic those conditions. Growing your orchids in drafty areas is a common cause of bud blast. If you grow your orchids around doors that lead outside your growing area, then when you open them and it's cold outside, that cold air can cause the buds to blast. So place your orchids in a more sheltered place away from outside doors in the winter to prevent this from happening. Certain doors and windows in my house aren't open in the winter. In the rooms where there's an orchid, those windows and doors aren't used in cold weather. Space heaters that run on kerosene or propane heaters produce ethylene gas that will cause all of your buds and your flowers to drop. Also, the gases emitted by fruit will cause bud blast. I don't place fruit bowls around my orchids. I keep all my fruit far away from my orchids for this reason. Also, too much fertilizer can cause bud blast. Practice intelligent fertilizing by keeping an eye on your orchids. Look at the orchid and see what stage of growth it's in, or if it's in a winter rest period. Fertilize them when they're growing canes, leaves, pseudobulbs, or spikes, but when they're blooming and the vegetative growth has slowed in the winter, then back off on your fertilizer routine. And never use more fertilizer than the package directions tell you to. That's a good rule for a green thumb. If an orchid has a damaged root system, if it has genetic problems, or if it's a weak plant in general, it will sometimes drop its buds or blooms prematurely. It takes a lot of energy from a strong plant to spike and bloom, and sometimes the orchid is just not strong enough to support the flowers, so it drops them. That's the main reason to start with a healthy plant, because it's more likely to produce blooms for you in the future. Inadequate light can cause bud blast. That's what happened with my mini Sogo Vivian. It started blooming, and then right as the buds and blooms started to open, we had several days of very low light. The temperature and the humidity change outside may have been part of the problem as well. Then we had some sunny days and it started blooming. And then suddenly I noticed that cold blast and that low light caused the blooms to just blast. The same thing happened with Legato when she started blooming. The buds on this part right here of the spike were just starting to open, and then we had several days of very low light and cold temperatures, and those buds blasted. Then the sun came out, temperatures returned back to normal, and the rest of the spike bloomed beautifully. If you're buying an orchid this time of year, remember that any sudden change in environment can cause bud blast easily. My husband has always commented that when my orchids rebloom for me, they're prettier than when I first buy them. And those have always been sweet, kind, encouraging words to me. But when you think about what happens when you buy an orchid, it's extraordinary. It's been moved out of the place that it was raised in. The orchid's been boxed up, placed in a truck, shipped to the store, and that's an ordeal for the orchid. Then I go and I buy it and I take it out of the store. Like I did this one, I bought this one in February, 10 years ago. I placed it in a cardboard box because it was so cold outside and I didn't want it to go through cold shock. And then the buds and blooms will blast if you don't put it in that cardboard box, almost guaranteed. So then you put your orchid in the car and then it gets to adapt to your home environment. That's a lot of adapting for an orchid. So I really look forward to them blooming in my own home. That's why I grow orchids. That's what excites me, is when they rebloom. So here's some hope and some tips if your buds have already blasted. Don't remove the spike unless it has totally turned brown, because new buds can form on the spike. This is what's happened with Legato. As you see here, her spike has elongated right here. I've noticed I got 4 new buds where she's elongated her spike. So I'm going to have more blooms on that spike. Orchids really do want to bloom for you. It's their thing. And I believe they make up for bud blast when they can. I'm hoping that Sogo Vivian does the same thing, that her spike elongates and I get some more blooms on those spikes as well. Another thing I need to point out is that it's considered completely normal for the bottom 1 or 2 buds to blast on the end of a spike. This has happened to me so many times, I don't think anything about it. You can see that here on Star. See this little bud right here? It's blasted. That is just considered totally normal. And several of you have asked about my sunroom setup, specifically about my space heaters and my temperature gauges, and I'll place a link to a video I did last month in the description box for you. And I so appreciate all the awesome comments from you all. Your kind words and your friendship, you all are awesome. I asked in my last video for all of you to let me know where in the world you all live, and I heard from so many of you. Please continue to let me know where you're from. I received a comment from my subscriber Lenore that is so fitting. She wrote, "I'm so excited to see posts from all over the world who follow Orchid Whisperer. How cool is that? An international family." So again, thank you all. You all honor me by watching my channel. And I'd love to say the blessing over you all, your families, and your orchids. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you his shalom peace. You all make it a great day, and we'll see you next time.